Wednesday, May 25th, the blessing of the family. For Jacob, the last 7 years of exile are a burden, and yet these are also the most fruitful years. In them, Jacob will father 11 of the 12 children who will become the ancestors of God's people. This section constitutes the center of Jacob's story, Genesis 25:19 to 35:26, and it begins and ends with the key phrase, God opened her womb, referring to Leah, Genesis 29:31, and to Rachel, Genesis 30:22. Each time, this statement is followed by births. The evidence is that these births are the result of God's miraculous action. Read Genesis 29:31 to 30:22. How are we today to understand the meaning of what takes place here? God opened Leah's womb, and she had a son, Reuben, whose name contains the verb ra'ah, which means to see, because God saw that she was unloved by Jacob, Genesis 29:31. This child was compensation for her in her pain and suffering. In addition, she gives the name of Simeon, which contains the verb shama, heard, to her second son, because God had heard Shama, the depth and the humiliation of her pain, and thus had pity on her, just as he had heard Hagar's affliction, Genesis 29:33. Leah's son, Simeon, also will resonate with the name of Hagar's son, Ishmael, which means God will hear, Genesis 16:11. When Leah gives birth to her last son, she calls him Judah, which means praise. Leah does not refer to her pain or even her blessing anymore. She just focuses on God and praises him for his grace. Strangely, it is only when Leah cannot give birth again that God remembers Rachel and opens Rachel's womb, Genesis 30:22. Rachel, the loved wife, had to wait 7 years after her marriage and 14 years after her betrothal with Jacob to have her first son, Genesis 29:18 to 27, compared with Genesis 30:25. She gave him the name of Joseph to signify that God had taken away Asaph, my reproach, and shall add Yasaph to me another son, Genesis 30:23 to 24. However wrong some of these situations were, God was still able to use them, even if he didn't condone them, in order to create a nation from the seed of Abraham. In what ways does this story reveal that God's purposes will be fulfilled in heaven and on earth, despite human foibles and errors? From the book Patriarchs and Prophets, page 238, it says, Inspiration faithfully records the faults of good men, those who were distinguished by the favor of God. Indeed, their faults are more fully presented than their virtues. This has been a subject of wonder to many, and has given the infidel occasion to scoff at the Bible. But it is one of the strongest evidences of the truth of Scripture that the facts are not glossed over, nor the sins of its chief characters suppressed. The minds of men are so subject to prejudice that it is not possible for human histories to be absolutely impartial. Had the Bible been written by uninspired persons, it would no doubt have presented the character of its honored men in a more flattering light. But as it is, we have a correct record of their experiences. Men whom God favored and to whom he entrusted great responsibilities were sometimes overcome by temptation and committed sin. even as we at the present day strive, waver, and frequently fall into error. Their lives, with all their faults and follies, are open before us, both for our encouragement and warning. If they had been represented as without fault, we too, with our sinful nature, might despair at our own mistakes and failures. But seeing where others struggled through discouragement like our own, where they fell under temptations as we have done, and yet took heart again and conquered through the grace of God, we are encouraged in our striving after righteousness, as they, though sometimes beaten back, recovered their ground and were blessed of God, so we too may be overcomers in the strength of Jesus. On the other hand, the record of their lives may serve as a warning to us. It shows that God will by no means clear the guilty. He sees sin in his most favored ones, and he deals with it in them even more strictly than in those who have less light and responsibility. The book Temperance, page 195 and 196, it says, "We are wholly dependent on God, and our faith is strengthened by still believing, though we cannot see God's purpose in his dealing with us, or the consequences of his dealing. Faith points forward and upward to things to come, laying hold of the only power that can make us complete in him. Let him take hold of my strength, that he may make peace with me," God declares, "and he shall make peace with me."